You're listening to the Dibbly-Dobbly podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Let's talk about domestic cricket, Jehan. Let's talk about the domestic scene in Australia, domestic cricket. Mainly about what can we do to make it better, really, in terms of the system or the structure, how the domestic season's scheduled, mainly, because that's been a talking point. So let's talk about that. What are your thoughts on that, Jehan? Do you think needs to be improved, the domestic structure as it is at the moment?
Firstly, I'd say it is a very difficult thing to do. There are a number of tournaments and leagues that you need to be able to fit in over the course of the season. It also needs to fit in and around the international season, so when Australia are playing. I think ideally, and this doesn't really, well, it hasn't really been happening in the last few years, but ideally I think the Sheffield Shield should be going on during the test season. Because if Australian players, get injured or start losing form and they need to select someone to come into the squad, they don't want to be watching Big Bash to see who's in form, which has kind of been the case in recent times.
Yeah.
So I think ideally you'd want the Shield running parallel to when the test matches are going on. The one-day tournament tends to be at the start of the domestic season, doesn't it? What's it called? The Marsh Cup?
Yes. Tends to run at a similar time than the Shield. But then it does have a bit of a break, and then it goes on into the following year. So January, February, March. It finishes. Yeah.
So I think so ideally you'd want that to be going on during the ODI leg of the international season. So you can pick a squad from who's done well in the early part of that season. And then as the ODIs go on, if players get injured, then you can pick from whoever's doing well towards the end of the Marsh Cup. What else? Big Bash. So for television ratings and audiences and trying to attract crowds, you want ideally for that to be going on during the holiday period, which means it's going to be at the same time as when the test matches are going on, which I don't mind really. I mean, I suppose that would be sort of the holiday period, so towards the end of December and the New Year's period.
Yeah.
But then I say that, but then you're going to run into that same issue of trying to pick test players when the Big Bash is going on.
Yeah.
So maybe that can be for like a limited period, and then you can end the Big Bash later on. I always remember the Australian summer generally divided into two, and I'm talking about the international side of things. So you have the test matches, and then you have the ODI season, which back in the day generally used to be a Tri-Nation series.
Yes, it did.
We haven't had one of those for a long time.
Well, we haven't had one since 2014-15 when India played Australia.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And England before the World Cup.
Yeah.
And before that, it was 2011-12 against India and Sri Lanka.
Yeah. So I used to look back at those fondly because you'd be really vested in the test matches that were going on, and then once they finish, you'd like to see what these guys can do in the one-day arena.
Yeah, that's right.
The first Tri series that I can remember was during the Ashes season of 98-99, where Sri Lanka joined as the third side in the Carlton United series. And that, I don't know if you can remember that one, but that was a pretty dramatic series.
Yes, it was with Murali.
There was a lot going on.
In Adelaide,
there was that game in Adelaide where they beat England, and there was that controversy with Murali. Mahela Jayawardene made his first 100 for Sri Lanka. ended up being a tight win for them. I remember Adam Gilchrist scoring 200s against Sri Lanka, 150 odd at the MCG. I remember that quite well. So yeah, I used to get excited about that part of the summer. Doesn't really happen these days though.
Yeah.
And I think it's because the schedule we're just getting a little bit too obsessed with T20 internationals. Like for me, it's fine. You can have the IPL, you can have these leagues all around the world. That's fine. They generate income, and overall they probably are good for the game. But you know, as Mike Howard was saying in that interview the other day, how much of these games do you actually remember? I can barely remember any T20 internationals. I remember Sri Lanka were here a couple of years ago, and there was a 5-match series. I think Australia won 4-1.
Yeah.
And there was a super over, I think, in one of those games.
Yeah, it was in the second one in Sydney. Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember Steve Smith getting a concussion diving for a catch at the boundary.
Yeah.
That's all I remember about that series. Whereas I can recall ODIs from 25 years ago.
Yeah.
So I would actually like that to come back, the Tri Series. I think T20 internationals. Sorry, I'm veering a little bit away from domestic cricket here, but I think it all ties in.
Yeah.
I think T20 internationals need to be limited to 3-match series. I don't see the point in a 5-match series. Or it got to a point where it was a bit ridiculous last year, leading into the T20 World Cup. England played 7 against Pakistan.
Yes, they did. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's a little bit excessive. I think you can sort of squeeze them into a tighter time frame as well, because if you think about it, a whole T20 game is about half a test match in terms of overs, just under. So I think what you can do is probably end up playing 3 in a 4-day space, and that will free up a lot more.
And you can play it at one venue as well. You don't have to travel.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so I think that can open up the schedule a lot more to fit in more ODIs and test matches if you need to. Yeah, so Australia's tour of Sri Lanka, when was it, 2 years ago? I thought that was just about right. They had 3. They started with 3 T20s, then 5 ODIs, and then 2 tests. I think it should have been 3 tests, but it was 2 tests.
Yeah,
I think that's how tours should be. And then also, if you do it that way, then players can fly in and out. You know, players that aren't in the ODI squad can come back home after the T20s, and the ones that are in the ODI squad can stay on for the test matches and such. I think that's the way it needs to be done. So yeah, overall, that is what I would do whilst the ODIs are going on. I don't know. You could probably go back to finishing off the Marsh Cup whilst the ODIs are going on. And I don't know if you've thought about this, but the season, is it ending earlier than it used to these days? Like, I feel like we're done by the end of January.
Yeah, we're sort of done by the end of January. The international summer, yeah. I think it's finishing a lot earlier than it used to. Because I remember in the 2011, 12, 13 period, it finished a lot later, like January, February. Obviously, different back then, but yeah, it is starting to finish a little bit earlier than usual. Yeah, usually by January, early January. Yeah, pretty much done, really.
So instead of trying to squeeze everything into that December, January period, the holiday period, maybe it can be spread out a bit more, and finish a bit later. I mean, the summer pretty much goes on till even into early March. It's still, the weather's pretty good here. So yeah, I mean, those would be my thoughts. I guess the main takeaway from that is I think they need to limit T20 internationals and bring back the tri-series.
Yeah, I think they are doing that.
Okay.
I think Pakistan are playing one. I think against, was it New Zealand or someone else? I saw that in the Future Tours program, so it is coming back, the tri-series. But I do remember that Australia did play a tri-series. It was a T20 tri-series against Pakistan and Zimbabwe in 2018, which Australia won.
Was that here? I don't remember.
No, that was in Zimbabwe.
In Zimbabwe. Okay. Yeah.
That T20 series, which they won against Pakistan in the final.
Yeah.
So they have done it for T20s before, but yeah, it's just the international schedule. It's very hard to try and space everything out, and I guess all countries are in the same boat. In an ideal world, what you suggested, yeah, you could do that, but with cricket being so busy and so compacted, you can't really do that. So you have to try and squeeze everything in. And you've got to do that at domestic level, but also international level as well. So it's very difficult to try and space everything out.
Yeah.
But that just comes down to the ICC, international cricket, knowing that there's a problem. You're playing too much cricket.
Yeah.
And it's losing its value a bit with some of the formats, because there's just too much, and people get probably tired of it as well. International cricket, there's so many series on. Where do you look? Same in the domestic summer as well. Okay.
Yeah.
We're playing Sheffield Shield, but then now we're playing Marsh One Day Cup, and now we're playing Big Bash. And other competitions as well. So yeah, definitely Cricket Australia can have a look at it and say, okay, we can probably improve the schedule a bit. This summer, the schedule will start a little bit later because of the World Cup. So the first Test match won't be played until nearly the end of December, which is a late start. Yeah, that's against Pakistan. That will be at Perth. Because of the World Cup starts in October, November. And then, everything gets pushed back. So that's why they're starting a bit later, the Test summer. So that's just the way it is in international cricket. So yeah, it's definitely changed over the years, the domestic structure, the domestic fixturing, and how it's structured as a whole. But yeah, I've certainly noticed that over the years that it's changed dramatically, and it's a lot different to what we used to in those sort of periods of 2010, 11, 12, 13. You would often have a test series, and then you'll have 5 one-dayers against whoever's touring. And then you'll have some T20s at the end. I remember that back in those days. So yeah, it's definitely changed now.
And it gives a bit more context to the tour as a whole. When, for example, if England come to play the Ashes, then they play an ODI series after that, instead of just
they haven't done that. They didn't do that last time.
No. So as opposed to just random teams coming in and out during the course of the year.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so I would like to see that tri-series coming back. Three teams that are reasonably competitive. I think they can play each other 3 times each. I think back in the day, when the interest levels were really high, it used to be 6 games or 5 games or 5 times.
Yes, it used to be that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think 3 is enough. Each team plays each other 3 times. Top 2 teams play a final series of 3. I'd really like to see that come back. And I used to feel that was part of the cricketing summer. Now it's sort of like you finish watching the Test matches and then you get 5 T20 internationals,
or 3, or you just get 3 ODIs.
Yeah, or exactly, just 3 ODIs which are forgotten about. I think even with the ODIs, the reason for its decline is just not playing enough of them. I think, And
Yeah.
it gets to a point where you start an ODI series and the players haven't played for like almost a year. And they're trying to figure out the pace of the game during the game,
Yeah.
which never used to be the case.
No. Never used to be that case. Yeah, it's
I
just.
mean, I just really hope that it doesn't completely decline and then fall off the radar.
Well,
We'll
they
see.
say in 4 years' time it could be not here altogether, according to the MCC there. But
Yeah,
that's just the way that it is in international cricket, the way it's structured, the way cricket boards structure tours and summers and domestic calendars. But it can definitely be improved, that's for sure. In an ideal world, absolutely. But at the moment, I think it's just going to be the status quo, and you're just going to have the same thing every summer, I think. But yes, definitely, you could have a look at that. But I don't know, Jehan, if they're going to do that or not, because
well, I mean, when you're a young domestic player that's coming up, do you aspire to be a great player for Australia or a great T20 player for Australia?
well, I think, if you're good enough in T20, then you'll go down the T20 route. It's like Tim David. He hasn't played any first-class cricket.
Yeah.
And I don't think he will, because he's not suited to that. He's mainly played T20 cricket, played T20 cricket for Singapore and now for Australia, and probably one-day cricket. So, yeah, but I think that's in all countries as well, domestically, is that you'll probably get a better chance on the domestic T20 circuit than you would international gig, really. And you become one of those T20 mercenaries where you just tour the world and you just play in these leagues. I think that's just the way it's going to go. So, yeah, I hope that's still the case for players domestically, that they still have aspirations to play for Australia in terms of Test cricket.
To play Test cricket.
That's the pinnacle. You know, T20 cricket's T20 cricket, one-day cricket is one-day cricket, but Test cricket's the pinnacle. And if you do well in that format, people rate you highly and remember you because of your performances. Whereas in T20 cricket, they just remember one innings or really not much of your career, really. So,
well, you're never going to go down in history. Well, people won't remember you for being the greatest ever T20 international player who didn't play any of the other formats.
Yeah,
I mean, even if your statistics showed that, people won't remember who you were.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
Because it just doesn't have the same context.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't have that historical reference point as Test cricket does. One-day cricket does because you have World Cups, whereas Test cricket, you have that history. T20 cricket, you don't. Because it only came in the early 2000s. There's not much history behind it.
Yeah.
Really, to reference. So it's still a new emerging format, really. Even though it's been around for more than, since the early 2000s, so nearly 20 years. It's still brand new, really. It's just becoming more and more dominant, as we know in the world. And that's the thing facing all countries around the world domestically, is that, domestic players will probably choose that option of playing T20 cricket over their country, which is the case in some parts of the world for various different reasons. So hopefully in Australia, that is not the case.
Yeah, and for me, it's just too fickle a format. Like, you can't plan and find talent and build up a squad to dominate in T20 cricket and win the World Cups. You just can't do that because anyone can win on their day.
Yeah,
it's the way how things are. I don't understand, as Mike Cowd was saying, I don't understand why we're playing one every 2 years, because that trophy is just going to keep continue changing hands.
That's right. It already has. We played 2 World Cups back to back.
Yeah, so it makes the whole thing pretty meaningless.
Yeah,
I remember the gap between the 2009 and the 2010 T20 World Cups was 7 or 8 months or something.
Mm.
which is just like, so we get to keep the trophy for 8 months. Great.
Yeah, that's yeah, that was the thing. They played in 2007, then 2009, 2010, then 2012, then 2016. It was 4 years, and then 2014, then 2016, then it was meant to be in 2020, but then shifted to 2021 in India. But then that wasn't played in India; that was played in the UAE, and then last year in Australia.
Yep.
And then obviously the next one's in a couple of years, 2024, which is only next year. So yeah, I don't
I
know.
think
That's
it
just
should
the
be
way the
every 4
ICC
years.
have done it. They want to, yeah, it should be. Obviously, in women's cricket, I can understand why it's every 2 years because women's cricket, it's a different structure to the men's side of things, and I think the more cricket they play is good. So I don't mind for that. It's in the men's side, you keep having these tournaments, then what's the point really in playing a World Cup, a T20 World Cup every 2 years where you're going to have a different winner and you've already played one,
Yeah.
especially in this period. But I think that's just the way the ICC have planned it. They have a World Cup of some sort or a tournament every year for the next 4 years, I think. Which
I'd
is,
see the way I'd do it is I'd have it every 4 years, and then have the World Cup every 4 years, but then have a 2 year period between the T20 World Cup and the 50 over World Cup. I'd probably bring back the Champions Trophy as well, which could be played one of those years. So you have sort of like a cycle going. So you have T20 World Cup, 2 years later ODI World Cup, 2 years later T20 World Cup, sort of thing. And then what you can do with your sides and your squads is you can gear towards building up for that World Cup. I think for ODI cricket, you do need, well, it used to be the case in the old days. I'm not really sure, but if you can say the same thing now, but I reckon you do need about 2 to 3 years to build up that squad for the World Cup. So you know who's going to be playing, and also to sort of gel as a team and figure out your way of playing as a team. Similar for T20 cricket, but I don't think you need as long. So for T20, you probably just need about 6 months to build that squad.
yeah.
And figure out the way you're going to play. So yeah, I mean that's the way I would do it, but obviously the ICC see things differently.
Yeah, they do. We sort of digressed a little bit there from domestic cricket in Australia, but
Yeah.
I suppose it ties in with everything that we've been talking about, really.
Yeah.
But hopefully they do fix the problems, but I think it's a little bit too late. I think it's too late to fix the problems that we have now. Anyway, that's just the way world cricket is. But yeah, so hopefully domestic cricket in Australia continues to be strong, because it has been strong in recent years and generations. Hopefully it will remain relevant and strong as Australian cricket progresses in the years to come. Hi everyone, hope you enjoyed listening to Jehan and I discuss domestic cricket in Australia. If you're listening to this episode of the podcast on our YouTube channel, let us know in the comments some of your thoughts on domestic cricket in Australia. We would love to hear what you have to say.